In this disaster client care program seasonal readiness office hours, today we will be focusing on disaster casework. If you've been joining us, we've been for the past couple of weeks, we've covered a number of topics from intake to event administration, and we have a lot more coming that we'll preview here coming up. But today, like I said, we'll be going through disaster casework. Happy to have you aboard. Quick run through the agenda. We'll be doing our introductions and housekeeping. We'll do a quick rundown of our disaster client care program overview, and then diving into the main topic of disaster casework. And then we've covered this on many of our presentations, so you've likely seen it before, our client care resources, and we will then open it up to questions and answers. That's we should have plenty of time for that. So it's not just me here on the camera. We've got several folks joining to talk through these topics with us. Jack Herman, our Senior Director of Disaster Client Care Programs, should be joining us, although there's a chance he won't be. We've got Flo Henkin, our volunteer partner in disaster casework, the volunteer partner of the person right next door, Joanna King, our Senior Program Manager for disaster casework. Also joining us, we've got Caroline Mitchell, who is a part of our situational awareness and I am now blanking on that, situational awareness and decision support at NHQ, our SADS team, working mostly with our disaster assessment. And then myself, the NHQ manager of disaster client care readiness. So we've got some great folks here to talk through all of this content. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are in a Microsoft webinar meeting. It's been scheduled for 90 minutes, and we intend to fill that 90 minutes and use it all. Attendees can enable their auto captioning in the Teams setting. The auto captioning can be found in the language and speech settings in Teams. So if you need to do that, go ahead and do it now. Our presenters will be using cameras while presenting so that you can see us and perhaps read some lips if needed for those that need that. I think it's also a good opportunity for us to feel like we're connecting with all of you. All of your lines are muted. You're in a listen only mode, and all of the chat feature and the hand raising should be turned off as well. And then we will be utilizing the Q&A feature, and we'll take questions at the end. Some participants may not be able to access the Q&A, so we will be utilizing Mentimeter at the end as well. You can use a code, use your phone to take a picture of all the QR code and then have that available to you. So we have those two options, the Q&A and the Mentimeter. Write down your questions as we go. For Mentimeter with Q&A, you should be able to put that right in the feature on the top. We should have a Q&A button that looks like two little bubbles. Then when you are writing down your question, we ask that you please enter your name and your region. So with your question, so we know who we're talking with. We will be recording the session and posting it to our client care program office hours. It's a YouTube playlist where we have all of our previous office hours and several other videos in that playlist. And we will post that soon after the event, after we cut and do all that good editing work. All right, so why are we here? Why are we doing office hours? Again, if you've been around for a while, this is how we communicate with you all. This is how we share the latest and greatest. For this particular series, why we are doing this office hour series is that we're taking the time to focus on the disaster client care seasonal readiness activities. We did the same thing last summer. If you remember, we talked about, we went back to basics. We talked about the program instead of the system. This year we are doing our seasonal readiness. And as I've already mentioned, it's our opportunity to share any program updates or offering reminders about programs. This time sharing the seasonal readiness activities and anything that might have changed or might be changing within some of these activities. It's also a really great opportunity for us to connect with the field, answer your questions, listen to feedback, all of that good stuff. So that is why we are hosting these office hours. I mentioned earlier that we would give you a little preview of what we have coming. Also get to see what we've already done. So you can go back to that YouTube playlist and see some of this previously recorded sessions. I've mentioned we've talked about event administration, intake. We also had a really robust session with our DMH, DHS, and DSC folks and those programs. Today we are doing disaster casework. Coming up, we get to talk about compliance. And then we'll be doing some RC care accounts, DRR coordination, and we're not sharing those dates yet, just in case we need to pause or we need to fill in with some other topics as things come up. That's why we don't share the dates or information just yet, but a little bit of a preview of some of the sessions that we are working on. So who can attend these events? Who can join these sessions? Everyone. Everyone's invited and everyone's welcome to attend all the sessions. We communicate this in several different channels, mainly through our cross-connection announcements and Yammer. We post through that. Those who have registered or attended previous office hours get a direct email through our client care office hours email. And then we also share these in the RC care update emails. And then it's also communicated through any routine meetings, any client care division advisor meetings, regional program lead meetings. We also do that through the application support lead meetings and several other channels. Probably couldn't list them all on one slide. What if you can't attend a session? Well, we're recording it. And we do put the meeting in our client care programs office hours YouTube playlist. These slides will be shared after the event, so these links will be available for you to click and go into our YouTube playlist. All right, let me just do a quick check here. We would like to dive into our disaster client care program overview. Was Jack able to join us? Okay, I'm not hearing Jack. So with that, what we will do instead, there are a couple of slides that Jack normally goes through. We actually already have this recorded, and we will, when we share the slides, we'll just update the slide deck with a link to the recording of the session that we've got Jack talking about our client care programs overview. If you've been a part of any of our previous sessions, you've likely heard it a few times. What this overview does is go through the disaster cycle services 5-year plan, and then gives you a little bit of backstory on our disaster client care programs, who we are, what we do, and what's involved, what's a part of that. So with that quick skip over, I'm going to go ahead and give this to Joanna to take us through disaster casework.
Thank you, Allison. I'm waiting for your slides to catch up. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for Disaster Casework Office Hours. The mission of the American Red Cross states that we are here to help alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies, and the client-facing activities included in disaster casework allow us to provide critical comfort during stressful events while supporting the needs of individuals, families, or communities. On our last seasonal readiness, we talked about the activity of intake, which does not always lead to financial assistance for every client, but it does give us the opportunity to positively support all clients with comfort, information, and referrals to both internal Red Cross resources and external community resources. This continues on through the casework and recovery planning process. Today, we'll talk about what happens after intake, give you some updates on things that are new, and hit on a few key reminders for fiscal year 24 disaster season. If you missed the office hours on intake, as Allison mentioned, we'll also remind you later in the presentation on how to access those recorded sessions. Several members of our support team at NHQ will be helping us walk through today's content. Next slide, please. An important reminder as we kick off this conversation around disaster casework is the timeline that cases should adhere to. Not all cases are the same. Some cases will end quickly, especially if your client has already developed a plan that they can implement after a disaster. Some cases are a lot more involved and may span past the suggested timeframes. This slide is here to help you plan your conversations with clients and gently encourage them to move forward with their recovery process as necessary and appropriate. There are certain system-driven timeframes, such as delivering financial assistance in the immediate assistance service. So keep an eye on your case to make sure it's moving along appropriately. After case is created from intake, within that first 72 hours, we're going to try to follow up with the client. You need to prepare for contacting that client for follow-up. Once you conduct follow-up, you'll build rapport with the client. Make sure you update the case comments with your contact results or attempts. Noted down at the bottom that all cases should have at least 3 attempts from different media sources, such as a phone call, email, text. Some regions may require additional outreach, and that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that we're at least giving 3 attempts to each client. The next phase, we'll gather some recovery roadblock information from the client. We'll do problem solving and advocacy, provide referrals in the community. If eligible, we may issue supplemental financial assistance. We'll go back and review those recovery roadblocks with the client maybe several times. And then if appropriate, we may request a regional disaster officer or disaster relief operation exception. At the end, we want to close the recovery planning service, complete that recovery planning, review any documentation that's left over, close that service within the 30-day time frame. And again, remember that every case is going to be a little different. Some may extend past this, and some will likely close quicker. It all depends on the situation. Next, I'd like to turn it to my amazing volunteer partner, Flo, and she's going to lead us through some next steps of today's conversation. Flo?
Flo, you're mute.
Okay. How's everybody doing? As part of seasonal readiness, we wanted to remind you that supplemental assistance is only available during levels 1, 2, and 3 disasters. The most important thing you need to know about supplemental assistance is that you should use it. We have budgeted for it, and this is a little module from Leonard at the end of the last seasonal readiness. So I'm paraphrasing, but what Leonard told us is that we have budgeted for it, and if the client qualifies, you should use it. The funds are available, and we're not saving the money for a rainy day. So I think that's the most important takeaway if you missed the last seasonal readiness presentation. So for each case, please evaluate the client's needs and qualifications for the possibility of supplemental assistance. We're not going to go through all these because we've covered them in previous sessions. Let's just look at the last 2. So supplemental assistance may not be provided at intake. Then no additional documentation, attestation, or other procedure may be required by a chapter, region, division, or DRO director. We still have some regions calling the landlord up, checking on the client, or asking the client to provide proof of their need or their lease. So please don't do that. That's not in the spirit of our standards and procedures. If you need a refresh of the qualifications that we did not go over on this slide, check out our YouTube channel for a review, including the following videos: Casework and Recovery Planning, Supplemental Financial Assistance, and Supplemental Assistance and RDO Exceptions. Also, if we need to, we can come back to this slide and go over the criteria during the Q&A if needed. Okay, I think we've covered that one. Okay, so disaster casework. As part of the DCS 5-year plan that Jack has reviewed in earlier presentations, we want to elevate transactions so they're transformational. Caseworkers are trained to use their soft skills such as active listening and the 3 C's during intake and recovery planning to give the client a good experience. So here's the thing. During a level 4 and higher disaster, recovery planning may not be approved, meaning that client intake needs to provide a more transformational experience, as this is the first and possibly only interaction a client will have with a Red Cross worker, unless unless they need health services, mental health, spiritual care, or other internal referrals. How can we make the intake experience more transformational? How can we help the client turn the corner? Here's some ideas. Please put your ideas in the Q&A, but here's some. Start off with a good hello, make the client feel comfortable, explain our services and set expectations, provide them with resources. An example is during EN, we hung a QR link to the resource directory in the waiting area so clients could browse programs while they waited. Try to give hope to the clients, and by all means, get to yes. Send them off with a good goodbye. Okay, I have one more slide. As part of seasonal readiness, it's important to know when to go to your supervisor for help. So we put together this slide. When an RDO exception is requested, that happens in RC care, but it wouldn't hurt to talk it over with your supervisor to give them a heads up of what's coming. You can talk over other difficult cases with them too. Sometimes the discussion helps you think things through, and they may have some suggestions that you hadn't thought of. In fact, you can talk to other caseworkers as well for ideas, but your supervisor is your go-to person. If you want to learn how to get promoted, how to get a gap for deployment, or how to get an intake refresher, go ask your supervisor. Anytime you have questions about a case, a client, or your career, your supervisor is the first stop. Okay, now, another new thing in RC care is the DA match action field and DA appeals. So I'm going to toss the mic to Caroline Mitchell from the DA team, who will review. Take it away, Caroline.
Thanks so much, and I'm glad to be here. So I just want to start with what the damage assessment team does. And DA provides unbiased, timely, valid, and reliable data about residential structural damage through typically an in-person assessment based on the FEMA Damage Assessment Pocket Guide that has been adopted for use by the American Red Cross. For example, so some programs will use then our data to assist our clients. And for example, immediate assistance, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is available on DRs that uses the data that the DA team provides to provide assistance as a qualifying way of providing assistance to our clients. When IA starts on an operation, typically only 85% of the DA is actually complete. And we do that so that we can start to provide the assistance to our clients as soon as we possibly can. But at the same time, DA is not totally done yet. And so I'd ask that you sometimes keep that in mind as you're working with our clients. So when you enter a client's case, sometimes damage assessment doesn't attach. A subcategory that comes up on the case will sometimes say conduct DDA hotshot. And that's not completely accurate about what's happening. It's an old carryover that's in the system that's still there as a subcategory. But we've created this area called DA match action to try to help everybody on both sides of the case, those that are facing the client and those that are with DA, some transparency around what's happening with the case at any given time as it relates to damage assessment. So when you see that damage assessment doesn't populate immediately, there might be a number of reasons why that happens. And we're going to talk about some of those today. So we like to think of this as a really cyclical process between damage assessment and client care. And we're trying to get to a place where we can determine if the client has qualifying or not qualifying damage on their residential structure. So if we click that button, I think we'll populate some of these. There we go. So what happens when DA doesn't populate immediately on the case? The first thing it might mean is the system needs to catch up. If any of you were on Ian, we provided almost 250,000 assessments of residential structures for Ian last year from DA. That's a lot of cases and a lot of addresses to be sitting inside RC Care, and it's working really hard. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit because you enter a client's address for a case, and basically the system's trying to search through 250,000 addresses to try to match that to, and it's going to take a little bit. So sometimes it just takes some time. It doesn't necessarily mean we don't have an assessment out there, right? But what will happen is when damage assessment doesn't immediately attach to a case or within kind of 10 or 15 minutes, it will go into a queue for the DA manager, the DA lead who's on that operation. And that queue is for the DA team to see that shows cases that don't have damage assessment assigned yet. When that happens, that DA lead or somebody who's working directly with them on that queue, they'll go in and assign what's called a DA match action. And we're going to talk about all of the categories of that here in a minute. But do know that just because it doesn't attach immediately doesn't mean it needs to be escalated. It doesn't mean you need to immediately put an appeal on that case, right? It just means a little patience, and it's going to somebody who I promise is going to take a look and try to figure out why that is that it doesn't have immediate DA. And remember, it's possible it's part of the 15% that we actually haven't assessed yet because we wanted to get to a place where we could help our clients as soon as possible. If we hit the button again, sometimes you'll see a DA match action that goes in that talks about either contacting a client or updating a case address. And then it will move to something called DA refresh. What that means, if you see that in the DA match action, what that means is that somebody is working on that case and it may manually need to be refreshed on the DA side. Don't panic. It just means we're working on it. And we will get there as soon as we can so that we can make sure that something happens. Sometimes we refresh it and we still need some additional information. And that's why we look at this process as cyclical. But if it needs an additional action from somebody on the client care team, then oftentimes we're going to put some comments in the feed so that that you will know if that was your case and you were working with that client, what it is that DA still needs in order to be able to successfully match an assessment with that client. And if we click again, there we go. So sometimes we know that when an assessment is done for a client, they may not have qualifying damage assessment for a particular program. Specifically, we can certainly talk about IA as one of those programs. And so we want to make sure that as we're talking with our clients, that I think, and I'm going to be pretty candid here, right? One of the worst things we can say sometimes is your damage is minor. And it wasn't minor to our clients because they had the worst day that they've ever had. And so we want to be really careful about how we talk about that. And so, and some programs use different categories of damage assessment for different ways of assisting our clients. So we're really talking about that as qualifying or not qualifying. But if your client that you're working with has not qualified for the type of assistance that you're working with them on, right, it is possible to do an appeal on that. We accept one appeal and one appeal only. And so you want to make sure the timing of that appeal is really going to benefit the client. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But we have two types of appeals, with or without documentation. And we'll also go over the specifics here in one more slide, or it's two more slides as well. And so, and each one of those is different depending on the type of client you're working with, like for what they might have and what they might be able to demonstrate in a particular situation. Sometimes, so if they do if our clients do an appeal with documentation, they're going to receive a link to upload some documentation. Sometimes our clients struggle being able to do that, and they might need some assistance with that as well. And so that's a conversation you might be thinking about how you're having with the client too. And then regardless of the outcome of the appeal, the people who are reviewing those appeals will put comments in the appeal comments section, and you're able to go back and check those to see why or why not an appeal may have been accepted or ultimately rejected when it was resolved. There are also times where documentation might be rejected to the client, but it doesn't make them necessarily ineligible. They just maybe didn't submit the correct a piece of correct documentation, or there might have been something that was at issue with the documentation. So we want to make sure that we can provide that feedback to our clients to really help them to be successful in this process if that's the direction the case needs to go. And then one more time, if we click. And so ultimately, the case will come to a resolution. Either the damage attaches because we actually had that already available and it's able to do that through a computer process, or it's possible that it went through the appeal process and it was resolved through that. So let's go to the next slide. Awesome. All right. And I know I'm supposed to turn on my camera, so there we go. All right, so in the DA match action, depending on how you're looking at RC Care, it might be down a little bit on the left-hand side in your view. It all depends on how it looks, but look for a box, like a section that says DA match action. It's not far down typically in the case. And these are all the categories that DA has to put in that box. And so the first one is DA hotshot needed. This is a true hotshot. A true hotshot means that we are actually going to send a team, 2 people out to a structure to take a look at that structure and make that assessment. It's really what we do all along in DA when we're normally going through and doing those before we ever open client cases. But this would be if we really didn't have any sort of assessment on it, and that needs to happen. And it will actually say in the DA match action, DA hotshot needed. The next one, probably not as important for you to know, but it's called a DA aggregator review. This means that the client's address is stuck someplace in our system, and it's really an opportunity for the DA team to try to figure out how that address has been stuck in the system and how to make the correction. The next one is update DA address. And if you see that there, what this actually means is that the address that is on the client side, so in RC Care, is correct. We have verified the address. You have verified the address, right? Casework has verified the address. It's what the client has on some form of identification, or we know that they were a resident in a particular location. And for whatever reason, DA does not have the same address as what's currently in RC Care. And so we'll use that as a way to correct the address on the DA side and get those 2 to match. The next one, most important for you all, is client contact needed. In this particular case, you will find a note from DA in the feed on the client's case that is asking some sort of question that we need assistance in understanding. Sometimes this happens when the client address is, for example, 32 Smith Street. And we know that that's an apartment building or a multifamily unit. But when the client presented, they didn't provide us with some sort of unit number. And so we're asking you to get a hold of that client again, and please help us to identify what unit it was that they resided in during the disaster, so that we could try to then match that to perhaps all the assessments that we have on that multifamily unit. And we just know that they must have lived in one of them, and we're trying to figure that out. It is wonderful if you can do that, contact the client, and then put a note back in, right, that says, hey, I contacted the client and they lived in unit 2. That also lets us know, right, if you get a hold of a case administrator, somebody's going to need to change that address for the client, so that then everything will match again in the system. So if you see client contact needed in that DA match action, please help us out and go to the feed and try to figure out what it is that we need to know from the client. And most importantly, if this is an SRT client and you're working in SRT for some reason, and they're with us in our shelters, it's a great opportunity to go over, have kind of that face-to-face interaction, and also get some information that we need to help process their case. All right, next slide. The next one is update case address. And in this particular case, if you see that in the DA match action, what that means is that there's some sort of issue in the client address that was put in during intake. And it might mean that the zip code was incorrect. It might mean that somehow we got an extra comma in there, or some strange space somehow happened in there. There's a lot of different possibilities, right? If you're using the standardizer and the standardized address that comes up, that shouldn't happen typically, but I know that sometimes we can't always do that, even though that's the preferred method. And so if there's a need, we will put in a DA match action for update case address, which is asking a case administrator to go in and try to solve the issue. And again, there will be a note in the feed that says what it is that we need changed in order to make sure that those addresses will match. We talked a little bit about DA refresh already. That means something needs to happen in the system to get them to sync, and it might be on our side just to go in. The DA lead can go in and hit that refresh button, and hopefully some changes have been made already in an address or an update to that client's record, and we can get those two to match. And then if you see DA override, this is an extreme case where somebody from NHQ actually needs to go in and intervene in the case for damage assessment. These don't happen very often, but every once in a while the system doesn't play well together, and we do have to take an intervention of that nature. We don't love to do this, and the reason is because every time we add a new service to the client record, it's going to go back out and try to gain access to the damage classification. And when we put an override in, it doesn't always help the case sometimes with additional services. So it's kind of a last resort for us, but it could be in there. All right, so that kind of finishes my terminology. I think I have one more slide on appeals. Yeah, awesome. All right, so I know appeals are a really interesting topic, so we'll try to kind of walk through this a little bit slower. So only enter an appeal for a client if there's already a damage classification that is attached to the case, because they only get one appeal. And if you enter an appeal and it didn't already have a damage classification, as soon as it matches to one, which could be 15 minutes later because the system was trying hard, and that case doesn't have qualifying damage, it's going to close the case, and it's going to put the client in a difficult situation, not where we want to be. So if the client does have a damage classification and it has non-qualifying data for the program that you're trying to have that client be eligible for, then an appeal might be the route you want to go. There are two types of appeals: appeals with and without documentation. So there's a drop-down box in the appeal section that says without documentation or with documentation. Make sure you're really looking at that and you pick the box you really mean. You pick the choice you really mean, because they go to two different places in DA with kind of different paths to get to an answer. So if it's an appeal without documentation for our clients, that means that the client really doesn't have any documentation that relates to the damage about their particular residence. So they might not have an insurance documentation, they might not have a FEMA document. There are a host of documents that could be available to them. So they really don't have anything. If that's the case, those appeals get cycled to a team that works virtually, who looks at all of the available data and available imagery that we have about that particular address. It does not mean that it automatically goes back to a hotshot for review. It is going to be reviewed virtually with all of the imagery that we have. If a determination can be made based on that, then that is how that appeal will be resolved. In a very last resort, if for some reason that cannot be determined, then it might have a DA team go back and revisit the location. So when we're talking to our clients, make sure we're setting good expectations with them. And if you're putting in an appeal without documentation, you don't automatically say, yes, somebody's going to come back out and take a look at your house again, because that may not be true. In fact, even when we do have teams go and revisit homes or even visit them on the first time, many people never see our teams do that. And it's heartbreaking sometimes when I read, that the client waited all day for somebody to come and they never saw anybody. And that's just a bummer on both sides, right? So let's make sure that just because they're doing an appeal without documentation doesn't mean somebody's going to go visit their home. And we want to make sure we set realistic expectations with our clients there, right? If they appeal with documentation, then there is a list of documentation that is acceptable for that appeal for us. And they'll receive a link that says upload documents so that they can do that. Pictures are not going to be okay. And I think we have this. Yep, perfect. So, right, very few hotshots are ever conducted on appeals. Client pictures are not accepted for appeals. They might show you a picture, they might even show you a video, but we can't take those and accept those. And the reason is because they aren't geolocated in any way, and we don't actually know when that picture was taken or even where that picture was taken. And I've heard some really great examples of pictures that perhaps were not above board. So we just won't do that, even though they've showed that to you. And sometimes we can read that in the appeal comments section that you've seen those pictures. They're going to need additional documentation, and pictures are not considered as part of that. So think about that also when you're deciding with or without documentation. Once somebody does put in an appeal in, we function usually on a 72-hour time frame for that appeal. And so they have 72 hours to upload documentation. And so if somebody says to you, well, I've applied with FEMA and they're going to send somebody out to inspect my home, but that hasn't happened yet and they don't have that documentation yet, then they're probably not going to get it within that 72-hour time frame, and their appeal is going to close. So make sure we think about some of that as we're working with our clients and deciding what type of appeal is best, or if they need to appeal right now, or maybe if the DR is going to be open for a bit and they're going to have that in a week from now, maybe that's the better time to submit that appeal. Right, so because we will accept those appeals all the way through the end of intake, that's a good way of thinking about some of that timing for our clients. And then the last thing is you have the opportunity to put in a comment in the appeals section about the conversation that you've had with the client and why that client might be appealing the damage assessment that they previously received. Think about what you're putting in here, right? More description is better. So if the front of the house looks perfect, but the back of the house is missing an entire wall, that might be part of the description you put in, right? So in talking with the client, rear wall of home has failed or was destroyed. That gives us a good opportunity to go, okay, that's what we would need to look at, and that's what we need to see if we have some imagery on or that we're able to make that assessment. But sometimes comments like DA is wrong is not really descriptive or helpful, and we don't really know what that means. And so we're just not really sure where to go look and how to best reassess that particular structure for that client. So really think about the best description that you can put in there in the appeal comment so that we can kind of pinpoint what we're looking for as well and try to do the best that we can to get that assessment done as quickly as we can for the appeal and get that turned back around for our client. I know we have some knowledge articles that I think, Joanna, you wanted to talk about there as well. And so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Caroline. Wonderful job. We really appreciate the information. And I know that the caseworkers out in the field, a lot of this is stuff either they haven't heard or could really have used that refresher on. So we appreciate it. If you're looking to find out what types of documents are approved for damage appeals, take a look at our damage appeal overview knowledge article. You can search for that in RC Care. Anybody can see it. And then if you'd like to see the steps of how to walk through requesting a damage appeal in RC Care, check out the other knowledge article, How to Request a Damage Appeal. So much. We're going to move on to some other new things now. As part of the RC Care vision to increase our functionality and reporting, we're really happy to share the release of household animals into the RC Care system and the opportunity to continue supporting our clients through their recovery. These improvements are a result of a significant grant from PetSmart Charities, which both allows us and requires us to begin considering animals as members of a household when collecting the data. We have already built these concepts into the new Shelter Client Intake application, or SCIA, and now we have released this similar functionality into the RC Care Casework console. In intake, this is not functional yet, but that's coming in the future, so just keep an eye out for it. The use of the term household animals is intentional, as the language best describes this information in RC Care. Household animals include 3 types of animals, which we're capturing in the system: household pets, service animals, and emotional support animals. Service animals and emotional support animals perform a job, and they are not classified as pets. So when you're speaking with your clients or the family, please make sure that you're using the appropriate terminology. If you're referring to their service animals or their emotional support animals, these are household animals. If you're referring to their pets, or if they're referring to their pets, it's perfectly fine to call it a household pet. These are the types of details that you'll capture: the type, as I just mentioned, the species, dog, cat, reptile, small animal, bird, or other, the status, not affected, injured, missing, or deceased. For more information on how to record the household animals, a step-by-step in RC Care, check out the knowledge article, Add a Household Animal After Intake. Additional information about household animals is on our next slide. So caseworkers can add household animals to the case from the Casework console. You can also edit the household animal once you've added it, which allows you to note immediate animal needs, such as accessible shelters, food, other supplies, or veterinary care. Additional details on the family's immediate needs. Once you note that immediate animal need, once that's been saved, it can't be removed. Only new needs can be selected, and that keeps up the original data. In addition, the RC Care Tips for Conversation has been updated to include prompts on how to have that conversation about household animals. And the Recovery Housing Roadblock category for utility pet other deposits was also updated to separate utilities and pet fees, which are now called pet considerations / pet fees. This is important data for recovery caseworkers to accurately capture when household animals is a need within this client's roadblock. Please take the time to add this information when appropriate for the household you're supporting. Next, we're going to move on to referrals, information, and advocacy with Flo.
Okay, I got both my buttons this time. This slide rounds out the services provided by Disaster Casework, providing information, referrals, and advocacy. The caseworker connects the client with both internal Red Cross services and external services. In RC Care, we can refer a client to health, mental health, integrated care and condolence team, and spiritual care. Other internal referrals include reunification, service to armed forces, disability integration. Oh, I just thought of something else. Babysitter training, mass care activities, such as when you refer a client to a shelter or feeding location, and even sound the alarm. Regions coordinate with government and partner agencies to gather information about available programs and their eligibility requirements. These programs are then entered into the resource directory so they can be accessed and documented in RC Care. For more information about providing referrals, go to the YouTube channel and look for the Back to Basics Providing Referrals, or go to the Providing Referrals topic in RC Care to get a list and links of all the applicable knowledge articles. So to wrap up this slide, we want to advocate for the client's best interest to ensure addressing the full range of community and government resources. Next slide, please. Are you interested in becoming a caseworker? If so, there are 2 points of entry for disaster casework. You can join your local recovery team or pursue a recovery care service associate gap, or both. It's possible to do just one or the other, but since it's the same skill set, most caseworkers are qualified to do both local and deployment casework. You can begin by following up on fire cases that happen in your region, or you can deploy to a disaster relief operation outside your region. We highly recommend that you join your local regional recovery team to learn about disaster casework. It would also be helping out your local territory or region. There you will have a supervisor who will follow you through your training, mentor you, and help you make that first call to the client. Many regions will have new caseworkers shadow and experienced caseworkers to begin with. Your region recovery team is a safety net, so to speak. Contact staff services or workforce engagement in your region to tell them of your interest, and they'll get you started down the right path. Both tracks include the same nucleus of training with a few extra courses for deploying outside of the region. Those who fit this role best are the helpers, and you know who you are. Next, Allison is going to review the resources available to help DAT responders and intake teams.
Thanks, Flo, like you, making sure I've got all the buttons pressed that I need to. So to kind of close us out here, we've got a couple of slides that you have likely seen many times. So we'll run through them very quickly. This first slide is all of our user support channels. Obviously, if you have an immediate need, we recommend you go to your supervisor first and foremost. They are right there for you, with you, to help you out. And I know we had that great slide earlier in this session about when to go to a supervisor. They are your best friends. They should be able to provide you any information that you may need, and if they can't, then they will point you in the direction that you need to go to, who you need to reach out to. As you can see on the slide, there are a variety of ways that you can get a hold of us and other folks who can support you in your client care work and with RC Care. The intake hotline, always obviously available, especially if you were there in the moment with a client having trouble getting that case open or having an EFT payment issue with a client, something like that. You can reach out and they will either get that taken care of for you or escalate to us so that we can help provide that support. I do want to call out the knowledge articles. We've mentioned a few of them here in this presentation and in our other presentations. These are at your fingertips within RC Care, and every day we are putting more information or updating the information in the knowledge articles so that while you are in RC Care, if you have a question about something, you can look that up directly in the system. A lot of it is for system use, for system issues that you're having. It gives you that real-time information on how to do the things and how things are supposed to work. The IT end user support is always available 24/7. They're there to assist with any questions about your account or devices. And our team listed here are technical exceptions Our team is monitoring the technical exceptions every day from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern time. And those are really for those sticky things. Something isn't right, it's not working, it's not meant for questions. But we do have a group of folks that monitors all of those. We here have our client care help inbox. That's monitored also during business hours, during the week. That's clientcare@redcross.org. We are shifting. Some may be familiar with our previous email, but we have made a shift to clientcare@redcross.org. One other thing that I do want to mention, as some of you probably have heard, changes are coming to the exchange. I think we've got the new example OneSource now. So until everything, all of those changes are made, the RC Care Toolkit is the place to go for all of our training and doctrine. As this change happens, as the shift to OneSource happens, we'll make sure you have all of that latest and greatest information and links to connect to those resources that you need. One last slide I'd like to cover briefly is our client care financial assistance data resources. Couple of things to call out here for seasonal readiness around places you can get information on what's going on from the client care perspective for large DROs. It's divided into two sections. What you have on your left is the recovery tab. That's tab 7 of the National Ops Summary. There are really 3 dashboards there that are super helpful to look at the client care information for level 3s and above. The client care operations dashboard, we have an immediate assistance dashboard, which goes into a little bit more detail on the immediate assistance, immediate financial assistance, and the various pieces that go into that. We also have a dashboard specifically about appeals and hotshots. Fun. I think we just talked about all of that. Our partners here in DA, they're one of our biggest internal partners. So as we submit appeals and as they work through the appeal process, we can track that information on the appeals and hotshot dashboard. These dashboards are maintained by the SADS group, the Situational Awareness and Decision Support Team. If you are having trouble accessing them or need access, please direct questions to those folks. They're the ones that provide that access. So then the other column is the RC Care column. There will be a specific folder within RC Care where reports will go for those DROs. Our team will populate that with a number of reports that will be helpful to the team that's running client care programs out in the field, including the DA match actions, qualifying damage versus the number of open IA cases, just as some examples. So that's a little bit of information about what is available through the season, and then we are always available to support if there are some more specific needs. And then I believe we are to our questions. So we'll go ahead. We've got, again, the 2 options here, our Q&A tab up on the top of your Teams bar. There should be 2 little bubbles with a question mark. That we'd like you to utilize. I see some folks have already started to utilize that, which is great. We also offer the alternative. If you can't see the Q&A button, please go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and enter this code on the screen that you see. It's 5378-7130, or take out your phone and scan the QR code on your screen. And we can, you can put in your questions that way. We have Master Dan Lavalette monitoring those questions for us. So with that, I am happy to open up for Q&A. I know we've already got a couple in here. I hope Caroline is ready as well. Let me just jump right in to our questions here. If DA adds a case comment for casework to take an action, is there also a way that gets flagged on a report, or does the caseworker or casework supervisor need to just manually check each case that is waiting the DA?
That's a really good question. I did a phone a friend to make sure I was answering it correctly. There is a DA match action report that will show you the actions that are taken and what the actions say. So you can run that report, just search in the reports section in all reports for DA match action. And if you need any help locating it, just let us know. So yes.
Thanks, Joe. And actually, I think you can stay right on a hot mic because I've got another question here. You did cover this during the session, but I think it's worthwhile bringing it up again. I've got a question from Pat Booker in Central Appalachia. Is there a list of approved documents for appeals?
There sure is. Good to see you, Pat. The list is in the knowledge article. So if you search for appeals in RC Care knowledge articles, there's an appeals overview that contains a list of all the approved documentation.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Another question in here from Matt Hackman out of Connecticut, Rhode Island. Are service and emotional support animals included under the pet considerations, pet fees?
That's a really great question. I also phoned a friend on that one. The pet considerations, pet fees will be updated in the future to say household animals. For right now, yes, you would include any household animal under pet considerations and pet fees. Keep in mind as well, you may be able to do an IDC referral if we're talking about a service animal that a client needs additional services for. So connect with your IDC folks as well when you're doing the household animal considerations.
Thanks, Joe. We did have a question come in here, and I know we like to mention it a number of times during the session. Somebody asked if slides were available for the 7-13 session. I believe they are available. We usually send those out right after the session, so may need to search around for those. If you're unable to find them, please reach out to us in our inbox at clientcare@redcross.org. We do record these sessions. So we do post them in our YouTube channel. We also send out the slides shortly after the session, and you'll receive a link to the YouTube channel in that as well. Let me just make sure here. It's a reminder, we're using the Q&A feature in Teams or Menti up on the screen to provide our questions. I'll ask one more question, then we'll see if Dan has any through Menti. I have a question from Dave Burns in CSOR on DRs. Are people assigned to be responsive to exceptions and TEs other than stated support hours for that DR, perhaps assigned to the DR?
Jamie, do you mind if I turn? Oh, go ahead, Allison.
I'm also happy to turn to Jamie. Or I can run with it. So with technical exceptions, there's a couple of different ways. So we are monitoring our technical exceptions from 10 to 6 a.m., 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern every day. We are monitoring those Monday to Monday or Tuesday to Tuesday, however you want to say it. Those are monitored every day for all of our situations. In some special circumstances, if there is an issue after hours, that would likely be something that would need to be escalated through the intake hotline. If there is something that needs some assistance that you need some help with, because we do not monitor that after 6 p.m. Eastern. I will say we did some special hours for Guam because they were in a completely different time zone. So we needed to have some off hours help for those folks. But in general, we are watching from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. All right, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to you for any Menti questions.
Thanks, Allison. I do have one. I do know the answer. Carolyn, I'm going to pass this one over to you, I think. But the question is, how do you upload screenshots/videos of damage provided by the client to a case? Where is the location in the system? I think you mentioned this earlier too.
Yeah, so a client may show that to you if they come into a center or you're working with a client from a casework perspective, but we can't accept those videos or those pictures right now directly from the client. There may come a time where technology changes a bit and we might be able to do something like that. But for right now, the only thing that they're able to upload are documents, and they'll receive a link that comes from RC Care to them that talks about how to upload that document.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Just to tag on, I don't believe we actually have the capability to store files in RC Care. So just take that a step further. And I actually just got a question in another one. I think this might be for you as well. If a client does not upload appropriate documents for an appeal, will the DA be reviewed virtually in the same way as, in quotes, appeal without documentation? And this one's from Rachel in the South Florida region.
That's a really good question, Rachel. But the answer actually is going to be no. So that's why it's really critical that you work with that client to see how that appeal will be best presented for their damage assessment. So if it comes in with documentation, then it is being routed to a group of document reviewers specifically, and it doesn't revert back to having the opportunity to be reviewed for additional data or for imagery that we have.
Thank you very much. Those are the two that I have on Menti, Allison.
Thanks, Dan. I do have a question here from Sue Engler. We have seen damaged residents which show as NVD or no visible damage. Virtual reviewers are not seeing damage inside residences. How often are teams in the field conducting hotshots? Is there a best practice for describing damage in comments on appeals?
Guessing that was also for me.
Probably.
Yep, got it. So that's also a great question, right? And so that goes really to that, giving the best description that you can of the condition that that your client has provided as you're working with them. But what's important, right, when we're talking about like what they might have inside their home too, and some things to think about, we're really talking about damage as structural damage. And so thinking about like, is there some sort of structural element of the residence that was damaged, either that has failed or has partially failed, right? When we think about structural damage, it's like, you know, the foundation or an exterior wall where, you know, the support on that wall has failed. It's, you know, it's where not just the shingles have come off of a roof, but where actually, you know, where the framing has been injured in that particular event. So inside of the home, you know, if it may not necessarily have been structural damage to the system of the home. And so thinking about some of that is really helpful, I think, maybe in those questions as we talk with clients. Less than 10% of all of these cases ever end up in a hotshot because we're typically able to resolve them in different ways, either through partner data, imagery, a host of other mechanisms that we usually have to address that.
Thanks, Caroline. We'll give you a little bit of a reprieve here just for a second. I do have a question from Mike Moody. Why is there no instruction manual for supplemental income on the exchange? I assume supplemental income means a supplemental assistance. So I don't know if Joe or Dan, you have some opinions on this.
Joe, do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
You can go ahead. I'm looking up something to hopefully add to it.
Yeah, so I'm just checking. Actually, I'm in knowledge right now, and I just wanted to check the topics and make sure that I could speak intelligently too. So there's actually two different articles that I would draw your attention to. The first one is titled How to Add Supplemental Assistance. So that obviously has the step-by-step guidance for adding the actual supplemental assistance to a case. And then I also want to draw your attention to an article that's called Disaster Client Care Programs Financial Assistance Price Guide. So this is actually, you know, just like we have the published printable version of our client care price guide on the exchange, this is an article that has the same information in it, and it has some additional links to go through, especially for supplemental assistance. It's got all of the information about the roadblocks and the additional, like the tiers and contributing client factors and all of that stuff. So if you're having trouble finding those articles, what I would say, not only do we have an article that helps folks, describes the steps for searching for articles in RC Care, We also have an article that talks about our topics, and both of these knowledge articles are actually found within the casework and recovery planning topic. And there's a whole slew of other articles that are in there that I'm sure are relevant to most of the folks that are on this call. So if you have a chance, I will drop the link to the casework and recovery planning topic right in the chat, or excuse me, right in the Q&A, and then folks can kind of just cruise through that.
Thank you, Dan. I think that covered it.
Thank you both. Vicki Johns from Idaho. For an appeal with documents, only 2 uploads are allowed. Most INS and FEMA inspections are over 20+ pages long. Is taking a photo of the summary page enough?
Great question. But no, the summary page is not enough. We actually need that detailed work. And so we actually page through sometimes 70 pages that people upload for us in a particular given doc. So it allows for 2 entries, if you will, but each entry can have multiple pages to it. And I have actually read some that are 70+. So I know it has the capacity to do that. But the summary is not enough for our doc reviewers to be able to do that.
Thanks, Caroline. Just check here. David Burns had an understanding that client taking pictures can be reviewed to help initiate a hotshot or specifically cause a DA person to look in a specific area of the residence for the damage they are indicating. How do you feel about that, Caroline?
So again, right, that client, when they talk with you, might show you that picture, and you can certainly put in the description of what you saw in that picture. And that would be helpful, right? Especially if it's maybe something that our initial teams weren't able to view, if it was the back of the residence and the back wall was structurally challenged, but there were multiple trees, for example, on the property at the time that we did that DA, and we didn't have access to see that. That would be really helpful. But you can type that into the description for us. But the pictures, a DA team's not going to see those pictures if they're uploaded to the client file. And you would really want to be doing probably an appeal without documentation there instead of with documentation. So yeah, the best you could do is a great description of what you saw.
Thanks, Caroline. You can stay unmuted because I have a follow-up from Sue Engler around the structural damage due to flooding. I'm not quite sure of the question here, but she says that it may not be visible from the outside, but is present.
Sure. Flooding can be a little bit of a challenge for sure. But oftentimes we have the imagery from when the disaster occurred that provides that for us too. As well as our government partners are able to provide us with additional data. So sometimes the assessment that, like what we're seeing in a water line, I'm guessing is what you're referencing there, that actually may be only one piece of the puzzle that we understand in a particular neighborhood or on a particular street. And so, we kind of also take all of that information into account.
Great, thank you. Another question here. I know we talked about, going to supervisors and using your resources around you. Somebody Lizette Ortiz is asking how soon an address can be updated on a case.
An address can be updated as soon as you realize that something's wrong with it. So it depends on the situation. If you're updating the address because DA didn't match, then it may be a little bit of time before you update it. If you enter the address and realize you spelled something wrong or left off a critical piece of information, a case administrator can make those changes pretty immediately. So there's not an exact time frame for updating addresses. It just depends on what's going on. for example, you put in there during intake, you complete the case, notify your region or your supervisor that the address was incorrectly typed in or something was missing, and a case administrator for that region or somebody that's supporting that region or DR can update it pretty immediately.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. I think I will see if Dan has anything in Menti. Otherwise, I can keep going down my list.
Thanks, Allison. Just a couple additional comments from the person who submitted the question around uploading a photo into the system. So I would just ask this person, I'm not going to read these, but I would just ask them to follow up with us offline, send us an email at clientcare@redcross.org, and we'll help you with this. But that's all I've got on this end, Allison.
Thanks, Dan. I do have a question in here from Shannon O'Neill. It's related to cases being open for evacuees, and I know that we provide some guidance for those cases, but she's also looking for some guidance on what to do with DA appeals on those types of cases. They do tend to, there is some sharing issues and things like that, but I don't know if Leonard, do you have any questions or any input on that topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so typically when we start opening cases for evacuees or clients that are moving around in unaffected regions, we'll issue doctor bulletins specific to that event, right? So I think, Shannon, this is a great suggestion to make sure that we clarify some of those pieces. There's some other case element information that we need to clarify as well in the midst of those doctor bulletins. So, the way we've got RC Care set up, sharing cases and enabling unaffected regions to work on cases is a lot easier than perhaps systems of the past. So just stay tuned on the doctrine bulletins as we release them for supporting clients in unaffected regions. And thanks for the suggestion on clarifying the DA piece. And like I said, we'll tighten that up, and then hopefully you should see it in the next time that we have to release a doctrine bulletin like that.
Thank you, Leonard. All right, I actually have run dry of comments and questions, surprisingly.
I see two in the Q&A. If you don't mind, Allison, I'd like to go over. There's two questions. One asks if there's financial or ICCT funds available for service animals / pets. And the other question is Red Cross paying for vet fees for disaster-related injuries for animals, household animals. So partly on both of those questions, Red Cross is not currently budgeting additional funds for vet fees for household animals, be they service animals, emotional support animals, or pets. However, if a service animal has a disaster-related need, and health services or mental health services feel that it's appropriate to use those ICCT funds towards supporting the client in that need, that is approved. So it's not budgeted for necessarily, but if the need exists for, service animals, then, we can work around that.
Thanks, Joe. When replacing a CAC, local or national, is it okay to FedEx a CAC to a client that's not loaded?
If you are FedExing a CAC, which is allowed, it should not be loaded. A CAC card should never be loaded until the client has that CAC card in their hand and can confirm with you that they have it. Maybe they give you the proxy number or the last 4 digits of the card to confirm that they are holding that card before you load it. Jamie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, please. That we should never FedEx a CAC that is not be in RC Care. So we can, especially when we're replacing expired CACs, we can put the CAC on the case and not load it, and then you can load it when they get it, or we can load it and then suspend it, and then you can FedEx it. But the CAC needs to be in RC Care before we FedEx it to the client. That actually helps the client because that way If they call into 1-800 Red Cross and get a client care agent, the client care agent can activate the CAC. They cannot activate a CAC if it's not on the case already. It also can prevent the client from, we have some issues where the client might call the bank first, and then the bank activates the CAC, and then we're unable to do that in RC Care, and now that we can't use that CAC. So really, if you're going to be FedExing a CAC, please make sure that it is in RC Care before you send it off.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you both. Let me just do a quick check here. All right, I am not seeing any questions in the Q&A. Dan, do you have anything?
Negative, Ghost Rider. The pattern is full.
We have had some really great questions today. Given that we are not seeing anything in either of our two Q&A, either the Q&A or the Menti, I think we will go ahead and close it down for the day. We have used most of our 90 minutes, and we appreciate everybody taking the time out of their busy schedules to attend. We have shared multiple times, but I don't think it hurts to say it again. We are recording this session, and it will be posted in our YouTube playlist. You should be able to you will get those links shortly after this session, along with a survey, an exit survey, that we would just like to know how this session was. Did this meet your needs? Did you have any questions that were unanswered? So you can expect that coming as well. We appreciate any comments or feedback that you've got. And like I said, you'll be getting that here in the next coming days. Thank you again for joining our session. We'll see you in 2 weeks for our compliance session. Again, same day of the week, same time, Thursday, the 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern. You'll see all of our communication around it. Thank you, everybody, and we look forward to talking to you in the near future. Have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Thank you all.